Welcome to Selenium Training. So today we'll start with Nunit and we'll see why Nunit is actually used in the market. Why do people use the combination of Nunit with Selenium? Why can't we use Selenium as standalone? So these are some of the questions which people generally ask. So now let us see what actually Nunit does. So I'll explain you with the help of the diagram. Now you have your Selenium scripts with you. Say suppose you've got number of Selenium scripts, each representing a different test case to execute. Okay, and then you would have a Excel file from which you want to read the data and all for executing the test. Then you would have to generate the reports as well, that what happened in which test case, whether it passed, whether it failed, if it passed or if it failed, what is the error message behind failing, right? And along with that you also have to generate the logs, that what happened at what point of time. Suppose the scripts have run for 6 to 7 hours, then you would need to keep a log that what happened at which second. Okay, so to control everything so that the scripts will get the data from the Excel file, the reports can be generated, logs can be generated, and everything happens in collaboration, we use Nunit. Okay, so on the right hand side we have the Selenium scripts, then on the left hand side we have the configurations, and in the center we have the controller. The controller is Nunit. Okay, so now we'll study the concepts of Nunit. The concepts of Nunit which will help execute the framework, which will help make the framework. Okay, so with the help of the Nunit we will be seeing how to run the test cases parallelly on the grid as well. Okay, so Nunit is very important. It will be the heart of the framework which we will be studying later on in the later modules. Right, so now let's start with it. Okay, so the first thing you need to do in your Visual Studio is that you need to install Nunit. Okay, so I open my Visual Studio, and to install Nunit you can install it from the net, from Google as well, or you can install it through Visual Studio as well. So you go to Tools menu. Under the Tools menu you go to Extensions and Updates, and then over here search for Nunit. So over here firstly you need to download the Nunit templates for Visual Studio. So I click on download. Okay, so the Nunit template is downloading. And then we click on install. So here you can see that it has successfully installed, and then next thing that we install is Nunit 3 test adapter. So we click on download. And then we click on install. Okay, so the test adapter has also installed successfully, and then it asked us to restart our Visual Studio. So I click on this restart now. Okay, so now Nunit has been configured into our Visual Studio. Okay, so Nunit is something which will control our test cases. Okay, so NUnit is something which is installed as a plugin in Visual Studio. So now let us implement simple test cases into Visual Studio project. So I create a new project. Okay, and after you install your NUnit, after you will be configuring NUnit into Visual Studio, then you will be able to see a test folder when you click on new project. Okay, and under the test folder you will see a NUnit unit test project. So in order to execute your test cases, to make your test cases, you will have to select NUnit 3 test project. Okay, so I select the NUnit 3 test project and I create one project, that is test framework. Okay, so the test framework has been created, and here you can see that this test class.cs is the default class that comes with the NUnit 3 test project. Okay, now over here you will see that there is no main method inside this class. Inside this test class there is no main method, but what you can see is that these are the annotations that you can see inside the test class. So for the class we have the annotation test fixture, and for the method, for all the functions, there is a class, there is an annotation with the test, there is an annotation with the attribute test. Okay, so for the class we have the annotation test fixture, and for all the methods we have the annotation test, which will help us execute our test cases normally. Okay, so now let us look at some of the NUnit features. That is, if we look at the syllabus, why NUnit, installing NUnit we have done. So now we'll see some of the NUnit annotations. Okay, there is something known as the annotations. So like I told you that, as you can see over here, there is no main method, no public static void main method. There is nothing like that inside this test class, but there is something known as the annotations. These are the annotations like I told you. Okay, so over here you can create any number of test fixture classes as you want. Say suppose you want to create another test fixture class, so you right click on your project, click on add, and then go to new item. And here as well, under the test folder you would have the NUnit test fixture attribute. Okay, so you need to create this test fixture. Just click once, and then say suppose I name it as sample test and click on add. Okay, so here you see that the sample test fixture class, it gets added up to into your project sample test class. Okay, which also has the same annotations for the class and the test annotation for the method, for the test method. Okay, so now say suppose I make one method known as the test app. Okay, so like here, as I told you that this test is the annotation and this test app is our test case. Okay, so this is the test case, the test app is the test case, and inside this, say suppose I write console.writeLine testing application. Okay, and similarly you can make another function as well with the test annotation, say like public void test login. Okay, so this is the second test case, test login, and this would also have the test annotation. Okay, and inside this, say we write login test. Alright, so with the help of the test annotations, we can make functions representing our test cases. Okay, so these, as I told you, that these are the annotations. You just need to put an annotation and then the function representing your test case will be formed. Okay, so now in order to run these test cases, how you run your test cases is that you simply right click on your class name, that is sample test. You right click on your class name and then select run test. Click on run test. Okay, now in order to see the status of your test cases, you have one separate window, that is the test explorer window. Under the test explorer window, you can see the details of your test cases, the output of your test cases. If you are not able to see the test explorer window, then you can simply access it by going to the test menu. Under the test menu, you go to Windows, and over here you will have the test explorer window. Okay, so like as you can see that inside the test sample test class, we had two test cases, test app and the test login. So over here you see that when we run our test, both the test cases, it just passed. Both the test cases have passed. And in order to look at the output of the test cases, over here you can see the output testing application, and for the test login we have the output as login test. Okay, so both the test cases have passed. Under the pass test, you can see that both the test cases have passed. Alright, so as you can see that there was no main method. Both the test methods have executed successfully. You don't have to worry about how it gets executed. There was no main method, so it has just executed by the end unit. End unit has itself executed. You need not to think about how it is all happening. Okay, so now let us look at some of the features of end unit. That is, we'll look at some of the annotations, some more annotations of end unit, which end unit provide with us. Okay, so when are they used and why are they used? We'll look at some of the annotations. Okay, so I create a new test fixture class for it. Okay, say I add a Yahoo test. Okay, and then I make the methods as say test receive mail. Okay, and okay, so this mail function, this test receive mail, is a function. Inside it we will write the Selenium code. Okay, inside it we will write the Selenium code which will test the application. So what we do is that we write the Selenium code inside the test annotation functions. Okay, so suppose this test receive mail is one of the functions, is one of my test cases which I want to execute. Okay, now similarly, if I make another function as public void test send mail. Okay, so another function with the test annotation. Okay, so this function would also have the Selenium code inside it. Okay, which will be testing the sending of emails. Okay, and and inside it say I write console.writeLine testing sending emails. Okay, and inside this function I write testing receiving emails. Okay, so I am not actually writing the Selenium code as of now. I'm only concentrating on the behavior of the end unit, the way end unit works. Okay, so firstly I need to know how the annotations work. Only then I will be able to generate the Selenium code. I will be able to make the framework. Okay, so for the time being I am just looking at how the end unit work. We'll look at that. Okay, and then we have one annotation besides this test annotation. We have one annotation that is setup, known as the setup annotation. Okay, say I make another function. Okay, and inside it I write say in setup. Okay, so we have one annotation known as setup annotation. Okay, so now let us look at the output of this test case first, and then we'll explain you what is this setup annotation. Okay, so in order to run this test case, I'll right click on the class name and you click on run test. Okay, so over here you see that the two test methods, the two test cases have passed successfully, test receive mail and test send mail. Okay, now if we look at the output of both these test cases, you look at the output. Okay, in setup and then testing receiving emails. Now before I tell you about the output, there is a predefined order in NUnit in which each of these annotation functions are executed. Okay, these annotations functions are executed. So the first to be executed is the setup annotation. Okay, like here in the output also you can see that the first method that executed was in setup, that is the setup annotation executed firstly, then the test annotation was executed. Okay, then the message was printed as testing receiving emails of this test receive mail. Okay, so setup will be called once before any of the test fixture test or methods are called. It will be called once. Alright, so now what can I actually do inside the setup annotation is that you can do some initialization inside the setup annotation. For example, you can open a browser inside this. Okay, say if you have say I can write over here opening browser. Okay, now if I want every test to execute in different browsers, then you can open a browser in the annotation method known as the setup. Okay, so in that case the setup method would be used in order to initialize something. Okay, so the initializations would be done inside the setup annotation, since this method would be called once before any test fixture class would be called. Okay, then similarly there is another annotation known as the tear down annotation. Okay, and say I write, now this tear down annotation would be called after the tests have been executed. That is, after each and every test cases have been executed, the tear down method would be called. Okay, so for the tear down function, like we can call for closing the browser, right? Say now you can give any function name over here. Okay, say over here I can give the function name as open browser as well. Okay, you can give any function name can be given, but the annotations should be correct. The function name could differ. The function name you can give anything, but the annotations should be correct. The basic meaning of these annotations should not change. Okay, and inside this tear down annotation we can write say closing browser. Okay, so this we have done, and now let us run the test class again. Okay, so now if we look at the outputs, over here you see that the output says opening browser, testing receiving emails, and then closing browser. And similarly, if we look at the second test case, over there also you can see the same output. That is, first it goes to the setup attribute, setup annotation, then it prints then it goes to the test annotation, and then it goes to the tear down annotation. Okay, so what will happen is that the test order, firstly the setup method will be executed and the browser will be opened. Okay, here you can see the browser will be open, and then the test method would be executed. The corresponding test method would be executed, and the receiving emails or the sending emails will be executed. Okay, and then after that the tear down method would be called. The tear down method would be executed and the browser would be closed, as you can see over here. Okay, so this is what is the meaning of these annotations: setup annotation and the tear down annotations. So you can simply write over here as the setup annotation would be called before executing every test case. Okay, and the tear down method would be called after executing every test case. After executing every test case. Okay, so this is just the basic example of the annotation functions in NUnit, the setup annotation and the tear down annotation, which will be mostly used in your NUnit projects. Okay. Okay, so now let us see how to run the test cases parallelly, how to execute your test cases parallelly at the same time. Okay, now suppose you have two test classes, that is the Yahoo test and the sample test. Okay, and say suppose I add one more test fixture class, say just a second, I declare one new test fixture class, that is Yahoo News test. Okay, and say suppose I have the method as test news. Okay, and inside it I write console.writeLine test news. Okay, now suppose we want to execute both these test classes parallelly, that is at the same time all three classes should be executed. Okay, so in order to run your test classes parallelly, you have one annotation that is known as the parallelizable attribute. Okay, you would have to declare your test fixture class as parallelizable in order to execute your test cases parallelly. Okay, now say suppose you want to run all these three classes parallelly at the same time. Okay, so you have to declare this parallelizable attribute inside the test fixture annotation. So I have declared it like this, and similarly we will declare in the Yahoo test parallelizable attribute. Okay, and similarly in the sample test as well. Okay, so this is what you would have to do in order to make your test cases, in order to execute your test cases parallelly. Okay, now let us see how it gets executed, what actually happens. Now as you can see that I just build my solution once. Okay, so now we have all these functions inside our three test classes. Now we want to execute all these test methods at the same time, that is parallelly. So we select all of them and then we just run the selected test. Okay, so now you see that all have executed parallelly at the same time, all of them have executed, and you can see the output of each and every test case as well. Okay, so this is how you can just run your test cases parallelly only with the help of this parallelizable attribute. You just need to declare your test fixture annotation, you just need to declare the parallelizable attribute inside this test fixture annotation, and your test cases would be executed parallelly. Okay, now suppose you want to skip a particular test. Okay, you don't want to execute this Yahoo News test, Okay, then what would be the solution? I will have to delete it. Now how many tests you can delete it? It would become a very difficult task if you've got 1000 test cases, and suppose in the morning you have to execute 50 test cases, then in the afternoon you have to execute 25 cases, and something like that. So what you can do is that in order to skip particular test cases, inside the test fixture annotation, again you have one more annotation in order to skip a particular test is ignore. Okay, you have the annotation ignore, and under the bracket you need to give the message, that is, say I write skip the test. Okay, so now you see that we have just used the annotation ignore in order to skip this particular test case, that is the test news class. Okay, so now when we again run all these test cases, I run all of these selected test cases. So now you see that all 4 of them have executed successfully, but the test news method, this test news method under the Yahoo News test have not passed. It has skipped. So under the skip test you have one method, test news, that have just skipped with the message skip the test. Okay, so this is how you can just skip your test cases with the help of this ignore annotation. In order to skip any of your test cases, you just need to declare this ignore annotation, and you can skip any of your test cases. Okay. Okay, if you have, say, one more method inside this Yahoo News test, that is public void, say any method xyz. Okay, and this also with the test annotation. Okay, and if I run this test class again, I click on run test. So you would see that both the methods inside this Yahoo News test would be skipped. If you declare this ignore annotation before this test fixture class, you would see that both the methods, both the test cases inside the Yahoo News test would be skipped. Okay, now if you want to skip a particular method inside a particular class Yahoo News test, say suppose I want to just skip this xyz method, I do not want to skip both these methods inside this Yahoo News test, so I will uncomment this, and what I will do, I will write assert dot ignore, and inside this I will give any method as skip the test. Okay, and then when I run it again, so now you see that the test news method is passed successfully, but the xyz method has skipped, because we have just written the assert.ignore statement inside this xyz method. So only the xyz method has skipped. The test news method has passed successfully. Okay,